Hello, I am Nolan Myers. I am a junior at Texas A&M University Commerce. In this presentation, I will be discussing to bubble or not to bubble, lessons learned from the NBA and WNBA's response to COVID-19, and how aspects of their response can translate to collegiate basketball. So starting things off, the NBA unveiled a six-phase plan to combat COVID-19 and progress forward with their season, which was nearing the NBA playoffs. So in the six-phase plan, each phase I've titled here. So the first phase was a return to home phase. The second phase was the testing phase to get everyone tested. Phase 3 was the mandatory individual workouts. And phase 4 was when they actually headed to Orlando, Florida for the bubble itself. Phase 5 was a scrimmage, and then phase 6 was when the conclusion of the regular season and the playoffs began. So phase 1 took place from June 12th to June 22nd of 2020. Players, particularly those international players that were out of the country, were urged to return to the team's home city. Masks were strictly enforced at the team facilities, and team staff had to remain at least 12 feet from players. And it was strongly recommended that players and staff get tested. It was not required yet by the NBA, but they did want to know who had been infected and as far as the virus had spread throughout the NBA. And then phases 2 and 3. So following phase 1, June 23rd through the 30th, there was a mandatory testing phase, and then teams were required to announce what 36 individuals they would be bringing to Orlando to the bubble campus. And that 36 individuals did include players, coaches, and staff. So it was very limited on who they could bring. Following that, in July 1st through the 9th for phase 3, that's when mandatory workouts began. So no team activities during this period were to exceed more than 8 players. And again, there was just continued mask and distancing and capacity protocols as far as keeping players safe and keeping them distant from any potential virus. Phase 4, this was July 7th through the 11th. Teams traveled to Orlando, and there was a mandatory self-isolation until 2 negative COVID-19 tests appeared more than 24 hours apart. Players were given the opportunity to wear what are called aura rings, which are a proximity alarm. They can measure vitals, and they could see potentially if a player did test positive, if they had come in close contact with that player, and it would help deter an outbreak. Team and league staff were required to wear this proximity alarm. And then additionally in the phase 4 testing, there was PED testing or performance-enhancing drug testing on players. And continuing with phase 4, players were allowed to socialize. They still had to maintain distancing precautions, and they were not given access to each other's rooms. They all had to stay individually in their own rooms. And then players were expected to remain on campus, but they were not prevented from leaving. There weren't necessarily people at the gates telling them to turn away. If they did leave, however, they were subjected to a nasal swab testing and a 10 to 14-day quarantine, as well as a reduction in pay for their time in the bubble. So phase 5, the scrimmage phase, was July 22nd through the 29th. Teams were allowed to play 3 scrimmages, and then players during this phase were allowed to socialize with other players and team staffers as long as they were on the bubble campus. So phase 6 was July 30th through October 13th. This is when basketball returned to normal, and we saw the conclusion of the regular season and playoffs. Once a team's season had ended, a player had to receive a negative COVID test within 24 hours of their departure. Each team that played beyond the first round of the playoffs could reserve up to 17 rooms for guests of players. So this is when we see families and guests be allowed on the bubble campus for the first time. And that's in phase 6. So we've been in the bubble stages for quite a while, and a lot of preparation has gone into the first time we're seeing families and guests be allowed to come see players and games. And like I said, players are responsible for the costs of their guests, and they must undergo 3 days of self-quarantine in a house or a hotel. And they could not admit anyone who had tested positive for the virus. So all of this put together, it was estimated that approximately 150 to 180 million dollars was put into the NBA bubble to help put on the rest of the NBA season. And it worked. So the bubble was put together for nearly 100 days, and throughout that 100 days, there was 0 positive tests for players, and they successfully managed the positive tests by employees within the bubble, and it did not infect anyone or postpone any games due to COVID-19. So the WNBA bubble was very similar to the NBA bubble concerning how training, practice, and everyday life went about in what was called the Wubble. It was located in Bradenton, Florida at IMG Academy. So like the NBA, there were phases to the WNBA's return. So on July 6th, teams reported to the IMG facilities in Bradenton, Florida. And then following that, individual and team workouts began to prepare for a 22-game season. An important difference in the WNBA and the NBA seasons, the NBA was restarting a season that had already been going on, and the really important part was to really get the teams to participate in a playoff system that they were working towards. The WNBA had not even started yet, so it was going to be a little bit more difficult to get a full schedule within a bubble scenario for the WNBA, whereas the NBA was looking mainly toward the playoffs. So individuals and teams worked in phase 2 to get ready for a 22-game season. And then from July 25th through September 13th, that's when the 22-game regular season took place. And then following that, there was the Wubble playoffs. So it was a single elimination structure just to limit on how long teams were there and kind of limit the exposure to other teams and potential outbreaks. So that began on September 15th. September 17th, we saw another single elimination structure in the second round, just again to eliminate any potential outbreaks. And then September 20th through the 29th is when the WNBA finals were, and that was a 5-game series. So the finals were through October 2nd through the 6th, and it worked also. The WNBA bubble was a massive success. The only true positives that were received during the first week of testing, and again, 0 games, just like the NBA, were postponed, and all 12 of the WNBA teams were able to complete their seasons. So college basketball's response. So in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the men's college basketball tournament in Division I will take place entirely in the state of Indiana. So games will be played in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, and as well in multiple arenas in Bloomington, Indiana. Teams will be housed and will stay on dedicated floors in hotels in Indianapolis to limit any exposure to other teams. And transportation will also be secure and isolated for players and staff. There will be a new bracketing system unveiled this year called an S-curve. Regions will be divided by snaking, 37 seeds, which are decided by the tournament committee. Throughout 2020 and 2021, this season, conferences and schools were responsible for health and safety of athletes, where the NCAA had provided influence and some rules as far as what could and couldn't go down this year, and what the NCAA could take from the NBA and WNBA's success. So one key component that really allowed for the success of the bubble and the Wubble was the increased management in team hotels and constant supervision over players, staff, and families. So in the NBA, we saw circumstances where some players did leave campus to go take care of personal matters, or just left for personal reasons, and they were managed super well as far as a self-quarantine and keeping them as far away from other players as possible to limit on potential outbreaks. So the bubble atmosphere is a great thing that they're bringing to college basketball as far as March Madness and the men's college basketball tournament. And each team's going to stay on their own floor and be separate from everyone else. Additionally, the isolation periods for the NBA and WNBA were massive in not bringing the virus in. That could set back the tournament even further if there wasn't a self-isolation period and there was an outbreak at the very beginning. And the NBA and the WNBA have really set a standard on what it's like to host an event within this COVID-19 pandemic. Several professional leagues and collegiate athletics have followed suit as far as the standard that they have set forth as far as hosting successful sporting events and tournament styles in COVID-19 pandemic situations. Thank you very much.